Oh, uno, dos, tres, cuatro. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised.
Revolution.
The revolution will not be televised. Will not be televised. Not be televised. The revolution will be.
What's happening, everybody? You are listening to another episode of the Visual Revolutionary Podcast. My name's Rick Stovall, and it's my show. And thanks for tuning in. Thanks for choosing me. If it's your first time, welcome. Glad to have you. I think I'm going to cut out a lot of the spiel. The format's changing a little bit, you know? I'm going to have a lot of return guests on, which means we won't be telling their biography because we've already told it. I'm still going to do the biographies, don't worry, because I'm interested. I like people's stories. I like to hear where they came from, but not always. Sometimes I just want to talk. And this is one of these episodes. Keith Ladzinski returns. He's one of my favorite photographers. I mean that. Keith, if you're listening, big fan. And Keith was nice enough to do the show when it first started. I think he was like episode 5. So if you really want to hear his biography, it's back there. I don't know if I recommend it though. I hope that I'm better at this show now. Anyway, Keith is an amazing photographer. He's got a great story from the skateboarding world to really kind of stamping a signature look in the rock climbing world, where he started using a lot of lighting techniques that people weren't doing in that space, to all the early advertising and commercial work he was doing, to working with National Geographic. He's had a storied career. He's a Canon Explorer of Light. He's an ambassador for so many programs, and deservedly so. I mean, honestly, because the diversity in his work, the consistency in his work is so impressive. He's really created an aesthetic that I think comes across as a Keith Ladzinski image, no matter what he's shooting. And that subject matter has grown and grown over the years. I think it's why he's still so excited and so amped on photography and filmmaking, because he constantly introduces new subjects, new storylines, from chasing storms in Tornado Alley to wildlife photography in all 7 continents, to big stories for National Geographic, to commercial work, to helping introduce Canon's camera lines like what he did for the R5C. I'll be honest, he probably helped sell me on that camera. So congrats, Canon. That was what he was supposed to do, right? I bought an R5C, at least somewhat influenced by Keith's recommendation, because I trust what he does and what he likes. I was stoked to have him back on the show. It's been years. 2015 is the first time we spoke, which is wild to me that that's when I started doing this podcast. I'm still doing it. I've had many breaks in between, yet here I am because I'm still inspired. I still truly love talking with people. It brings so much creative inspiration into my own life and career, and hopefully it does the same for you. I've had many messages over the years of people telling me that it does. So to those people, thank you very much. And to everyone else, hopefully you find some inspiration from this one. Keith's not only an amazing photographer and filmmaker, but just a nice guy, a thoughtful person who had some beautiful things to say in our conversation. So that's why I'll leave it. I won't keep rambling on with some long-winded intro. It's probably too late for that, but that's what I do. Make sure to check out visualrevolutionary.com for all your information. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, please. Hit the subscribe button. Very helpful. Another subscribe button you could hit for me is on YouTube. Starting to release some video content on there. So please find your way to YouTube. It's just at Visual Revolutionary. It's got the logo. You'll see it. Hit subscribe. Give me a follow on Instagram. All these ask, but I do give. I think I've established myself as giving more than asking, but that's an ask. All right, I'll shut up for real. Here is my conversation with the one and only Keith Ladzinski.
Revolution.
Keith Ladzinski. Welcome back to the podcast, dude. Thanks for doing it.
It's a pleasure to be back, man. It's been a minute. It's great to see your face again.
It's been a hot minute. I was looking back. I was like, when did we do this? It was in 2015, episode 5, I think.
Yeah, I remember this. It was in my old apartment.
Yep.
But it's funny. I listen to the podcast all the time. You get great guests. The conversations are fantastic. So in an odd way, just hearing your voice doesn't feel like it was that long ago because I hear it when I listen to the podcast. So
thank you for listening.
Yeah,
dude.
man.
Man,
of course.
Listen, I'm such a fan. In all honesty, it was cool to come hang out with you in Boulder and obviously in Andy and but like over the years, I mean, we have so much to catch up on. Like so much has changed in your life as well as mine. But man, you have just remained like this very consistent force in what you do. Like consistency is the best. It's gorgeous, but like it's consistently gorgeous. And so I find your Instagram feed it's one of my favorite feeds to check in on. It's pretty diverse, from birding to storm chasing.
I appreciate your words, man. It's flattering to hear. I think variety for me has always been something I just sort of crave, and so I do love. I think it's a slippery slope. It's something we could definitely talk about. I think I wouldn't say I get bored if I shoot the same thing too much. I find that I start to find a formulaic process of doing it. So for the way I work, finding new genres, mixing it up. And also it's flattering when you get opportunities that are a little bit outside of what people might know of your work and taking those things. And I mean, since 2015, so much has changed in my work. I think back then, the bulk of it could be classified as adventure sports work, which I loved. And those are great years. I deeply enjoyed that. But, you know, as you get older, there's certain parts of those jobs that just become more difficult. Becoming a parent changed some of the way I looked at a lot of those things that I was doing that had inherent danger, but also just this, you know, craving growth and craving new opportunity. And, you know, you sort of learn techniques when you're shooting specific things. Like, I feel like my early days of shooting skateboarding, which was hardly published, I did a little bit of published work, but I was doing it mostly on the hobby side of things and lucky to get some work that was actually being commissioned. But a lot of that work influenced the way I approached climbing, which approached the way I photographed mountain biking, which helped. And I was photographing cars, like it, all of that stuff. And then wildlife,
right?
I love lighting my wildlife. And so I think the cool part about being all over the board is that you get to take things you've learned in certain genres and bring them into new ones. As well as learning the traditional techniques of whatever that genre is. The slippery slope, I think, is people that have really solidified a silo get specific opportunities. And I felt that when I was like extreme sports guy.
Right.
But as you start moving around more, like I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I get to work with a lot of really interesting agencies and magazines and things like along those lines. But when you look at someone's brand, like we can think of people where it's like that person is portrait, that person is Arctic, whatever it is. And these are just those things you think about at night when you're laying in bed. You're like, what is my brand?
Right. Well, listen, man, on the flip side of that, because I have been siloed for most of my career. And look, I've been fortunate to have that as an architectural shooter. And I've talked about this endlessly on the show. And so for those of you that have heard it a million times, like I apologize. But, you know, I had an agent early on tell me, that's what you should do. Like silo yourself, create a brand. People want to invest in a master, not a jack of all trades. And so I heeded that advice, and it wasn't bad advice. It helped me in a lot of ways. However, I started getting bored. You know, I mean, like you said, things did become formulaic. It was easy to go get a job done without really feeling that creatively challenged. I mean, sometimes I would, but I mean, I could definitely almost sleepwalk through a job. And I hate saying that could happen, but it probably did a couple times if I was less interested in the project and still produce good work. And so when I see someone like yourself and so many people that have been on this show, I think that what you're talking about, it provides them so much continued inspiration. You know, just the ability of like constantly starting, not necessarily from scratch, because obviously you have a toolbox that you can take with you to as you evolve. But that kind of beginner's mindset, man, it is definitely fostered more by constantly changing what you're looking at. And through this show, I've always been reminded by people like yourself, like, yes, I need to, even if it's not paying, I need to start seeking elsewhere. I need to shoot personal projects. I need to shoot stuff that I never even show anyone. And even lately, look, I took a hiatus from doing this show for a while, and I said yes to a bunch of stuff that it would have been really easy to say no to. I said yes to stuff where I could have been like, listen, I am way too busy for this. I don't have time. There's no money. And instead I was like, yeah, let's do it. This will be fun. And it was challenging. It was way outside of my wheelhouse. And I feared failure way more so by doing it. And I just, like I said, I look at someone like yourself and your career and the breadth of your work. And that's what I'm reminded of, is like, they're just constantly challenging themselves and stepping outside of their wheelhouse. And yeah, it's amazing, dude. Like I said, I'm such a fan.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And I think, back to some of the points you were making there's something to be said for being so dialed where, you were saying you just could show up and, phone it in, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I know that's not what you mean.
No, I mean,
it's
unfortunately,
showing up without it, but you kind of it's straightforward at that
Right.
point. And I think there's a phenomenal benefit to certain clients that are hiring you, because they want someone to show up and be like, we're hiring you for you. We're hiring you because we love the way your work looks. And so even if you show up and you just get there and it's not like you're saying boring, but you're more just like, you're seeing everything pretty quick. You're like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to pop this up over there. We're going to put this lens on. We're going to blah, 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 whatever.
Right.
For the client, that's wildly beneficial. They kind of want that. They don't want you coming in and it being scrappy. And so, I don't know. I'm sure, because I love your work. Your architecture work is beautiful.
Thank you.
I'm sure if you go out and if you were to shoot someone's portrait, you would have your own unique way of lighting it. If you were to go out and shoot landscapes, you would probably interpret them in the way you see lines and patterns. I think that I'm sure what you do can translate into a multitude of different genres. And I think that's what's so cool about when we, I think, speaking for myself, and I imagine it's the same for you, a lot of our favorite photographers, they do have a style.
Right.
And it might not, even the ones that aren't just like, I shoot whales and I shoot whales great. If they, the really broad strokes photographers, a lot of those styles come from this very thing, right? They started in one place and they've just sort of, the classic example is the prolific newspaper photographer, right?
Right.
Some of my favorite photographers came out of the newspaper sort of journalism world, where on any given day, their assignment work was just unpredictable. They're like, you're photographing the mayor in the morning, then you're going to go to a sporting event. And
Right.
then,
Yeah.
there's a fire that's happening in a building. You got to go cover that. And then at the end of the day, you're, someone turned 100 years old to the old folks home and you got to go cover that. It's like, it's so eclectic.
Mm-hmm.
They become good and sharp and quick, and they can just show up and break a situation and a scene down.
I would pay you the same compliment. Because what I see, I think, when I say consistency in your work, that's what I see. You do have a stamp you put on things, and it feels like a Keith Ladzinski photo. Like your lighting, whatever you're doing in post, like it has its own stamp. And from, like I said, shots of wildlife and birds to, I know you'll still step into the action world space sometimes, especially you did the whole Canon R5C release and, really you were out there doing it. And then the storm chasing, which, man, I want to talk about that because wow, but even there, it's like, it's your colors and your composition. It's still, it all belongs together. Like as I go through your feed, it's not something where you're like, wow, he's just kind of all over the place. And, that's harder said than done, I think, because thank you for complimenting my work. And I think I do offer a certain way of looking at things because I look at symmetry all the time. But I think I struggle more sometimes in the lifestyle space or whatever on trying to, I can do a good job. I've done this for a long time. I know how cameras work and I know how to light things. But like I said, it's just so it feels so outside of my wheelhouse sometimes that I tend to question myself way more, like I tend to, when I'm editing and I'm making selects, I'm like, oh man, like, did I fail on it? Did I inevitably I think I did good enough, but yeah, I think that's what's so impressive about yourself. Dan Winters, I always bring him up because he's so prolific and he's got so many creative outlets, but they all kind of feel like Dan, like even from his tabletop stuff to like the celebrity portrait, there's something in there, the coloring, all of it, that it still feels like his work.
I couldn't agree more. Dan's a huge hero of mine. Even his space work that he's been doing, right. It feels Dan Winters. So when you say that about my work, that means a lot. That's the highest praise I think you can get. And all humility aside, I have heard that from a variety of people over the years. And that means something to me because it means that at the very least, even if I am shooting things that aren't within the same genre, they still look like something I've made. And that means a lot. And I think a lot of that's just the way we break scenes down and look at things and the attention to detail we demand here, the lack thereof it in other places that sometimes works. but you know, it is fun to mix up your style. Like something I've been really getting more and more into over the last, I would say 6 or 7 years, is just having that small point and shoot camera mindset where you roam around and you get in this, you know, it all kind of happened from earlier National Geographic assignment work where I had to go interact with people that I didn't know. It was really more on the journalistic side where they're like, you have to go cover this and that. And it's going to force me to go in and basically make friends on the fly, shoot in a specific style. And there's a lot of people's work over the years that I've loved where you go in and they're framing through small things. It's kind of dirty. You know, the work isn't, you're not sitting there looking for everything to be perfect.
Yes.
You're just going in there to look for that gesture that means something. And sometimes the mess around it is what complements it so well. And, you know, it's that like a 35 millimeter look, you know, that sort of iconic look that you look back on a lot of famous journalism and it was shot in that field. It was shot in that field because the cameras were small and compact and made sense, but they also have a very, very specific look to them. And the more you get down the more you explore photography and the further down the road you get in your career, one of the things that I've really loved about the process is getting more into the weeds about why things look a certain way.
Yes.
How a certain lens will give you something that another lens that may even be the same focal length. There's just a feel to certain things and mechanics and the way certain lenses flare and all that type of thing. That is one of the great, I mean, I am a nerd photographer at heart. I truly am. I get so into it, man. I got to shoot every day. Like it's, for me, I like the process and I love talking about the gear. I love looking at other people's work. But I love, you know, when you find what you hope to be is your own style, trying to interject that into the way you see it.
Yes.
I don't know, man. We're lucky to do this. I'm just as excited about photography as I've been my entire life, if not more. You know what I mean? And I think that's hard to say in a lot of occupations.
Yeah, I see it, dude. I mean, I see it, and when I see you talk and the work you do, here's something I talk about a lot on the show, and I think you're a great person to talk to about because I see you doing it. But look, you're no stranger to traveling all of the continents. You know, like you've been everywhere. You know, and on some amazing location shoots, some amazing adventure shoots. The storytelling is far flung and things that young people just dream about. One day I'll get to do what Keith does. However, it doesn't stop you from constantly shooting in your backyard. I mean, from all the wildlife stuff you do of a very exotic species, you know, you'll shoot a red-winged blackbird in the backyard or finches in the bushes, stuff we see every day and we just take for granted and we get jaded and it's beautiful, you know? And I've talked about it on the show a bunch. I'm very guilty of it. Look, I'm in the mountains. Like I can look out my studio window right now and see the New York range, you know? And even though there's beauty right in front of me, I become so used to it and so jaded by it sometimes that you just forget to stop and take a moment and realize like I could shoot in my backyard every day and probably make art. But we just get carried away with this idea, like we need to go somewhere. And I think that introduces obviously the desire to want to create, but you know, so many people I think make the mistake of waiting for the amazing adventure to pick up the camera instead of just, you know, like tell the story of your own backyard.
Sure. I definitely can respond to a lot of what you're saying in terms of some people don't necessarily take advantage of where they live. For me, I enjoy the process of shooting, like birds is a great example. They're incredibly difficult, but you can do it anywhere. You can quite literally photograph birds just about anywhere in the world. And it doesn't matter if it's something you see every day, like it's a Caston's finch and you're like, yeah, those things you see them all the time. It could be a pigeon.
Yeah.
There's just so much beauty in the gesture these animals have. But I will tell you, the catalyst to all that for me was the challenge. That was what got me hooked. And then once you know, it's a training ground. Like if you want to get good at photographing high speed action sports or auto, anything, go birding.
Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult. It's unscripted and it's undirected. You cannot get a moment twice. You know what I mean? You have to really go and work for it. And you're typically dealing with things that are very small, skittish and your big lens skills need to rise to that occasion, or you won't get anything. It's a lot of frustration. It's like going out and playing golf. Like if you take it serious, it's going to be
Sure.
there's going to be a lot of heartache.
Right.
But if you go out to do it recreationally, which is mostly what I do, anytime I have a wildlife job, like I've got something coming up in November, I do a lot of birding to lead up to that. Because if I have to go shoot lions or something like that, that's easy, especially compared to little birds, you know what I mean? But you are going to get those moments where things become chaotic really quick, and being able to respond to that. So the muscle memory, something I've always prescribed to is staying in shape creatively.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you can relate with this. If you get a job that might be a little bit outside of what you normally do, if you're creatively in shape, that job is going to be a lot easier because your decision making is sharper and more tactile. And it's something, you're just going to, and I think one of the biggest things I see in a lot of young photographers that I'll hire to bring along on productions and things is indecisiveness.
Sure.
There's any number of ways to do something. It's making a good, accurate decision. And I remember I used to teach these workshops years and years ago for Rich Clarkson, who's a guy out of Denver. And he would bring together this unbelievable faculty, and this one that we would do up in Jackson Hole every year. He would have Bill Allard and a host of, just legacy photographers there. And I would get to listen to some of the stories, because part of the job was not just teaching and working with students. It was, you would do a 1 hour talk. Everyone had to do like one 1 hour talk. It could be biographical. It could be about something specific. And one year he had just published a book. I think it was like a 50-year anthem kind of book. And so he was going through and showing, slides on the big theater, just big pictures, but he was reading excerpts from his book that he had also written, because Bill's equally a great writer as he is a photographer. And one of the stories he was telling, it was this scene where it was just, like 1,000 people somewhere in South America. And it was just a lot of chaos, but it was beautiful. It was a festivity of some kind. But the kind of thing where as a photographer, you're looking around and the first thing is like, where do I point my lens?
Right.
Like, where do I
start?
How do I silo in on this?
Yes.
And so he starts talking about that process in there, and I'm going to butcher every bit of this. It's much better to be looked at into this book. But effectively what he was saying was, I looked out at this sea of people, and it was like a hunter that flushes a flock of birds, and they all take to the sky. The problem is like, which way do you point the rifle? There's so much chaos happening at once, but you have to make a decision. And he said, like the hunter that flushes a flock of birds into the air and who has to pick a bird, I picked a bird. And that's how he kind of leads into this. And he wrote it saying it so much more poetically than I can. But effectively, as soon as he said that, I picked a bird, his slideshow, it was so sick. It's giving me goosebumps thinking about it. It was this master frame of chaos of all these people. And then each frame was just like siloing in. And all of a sudden it was just brilliant moments. But the takeaway was, there's no silver bullet solution a lot of times. It's making a decision, committing to it, and knowing that you can execute on that decision. I think that is what separates a true professional from someone who's still trying to figure it out and find their voice. It's being able to walk into the situation that you've been presented with and making sense of it, being like, this will work. Doesn't matter if it's the best decision, as long as you can execute on that decision, it's a good one.
100%. Yeah, I love that. Couldn't agree more. And like you said, you see it a lot. I see it with my own kids, they're getting older, and I tell them all the time, they'll be kind of like, especially my son, I think he struggles with it more, and kind of hemming and hawing over some decision. I'm like, buddy, just pick one and then forget about all the other options, just move forward with that one. The other ones don't exist anymore. Like, you can't question the past as far as like, well, what if I would have done this? And you're like, well, you didn't. So like, move forward with it. And I think
variety can kill it. Variety can kill you as an artist, but variety can kill you as a young man who's trying to figure out whatever. I'm not sure what the situations are exactly here, but yeah, it's committing and then throwing everything into that one decision.
Yeah.
That's the right decision.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Let's talk about being a father, because that's a big change in your life, obviously, since the first time we talked. And that's how long it's been, because your boy's getting older for sure. He's starting to grow up. But, tell me a little bit, and this is a broad sweeping question, so you take it wherever you want, but like, how do you feel it changed you as a person, and how do you feel it changed you as an artist? I mean,
fatherhood has changed everything. Every decision I make now, that one is always looming, and whether or not it's the right decision. That's certainly from a work perspective. And I could say that should I travel here? Should I do this? Should I, is my schedule getting out of hand? It immediately anchors you. I would say that becoming a parent has given me a higher purpose, so to speak.
Right.
And refreshing in a lot of ways. You shed so much selfishness as you kind of get way deeper into that pool. And a lot of it is because there's no thing I would rather do than be with my son, having an experience with him. I can say that like wholeheartedly, and it really affects the decisions in your professional and your personal world. But I think it's quite refreshing. I think it's made me more efficient, because I know I have limited time in my day, where I have to get a set amount of things done while he's at school. And when I travel as well, I know there's no bookends of relaxation on any side of that trip anymore. It's like, I got to go out, do the job at hand. And then when I come back, it's just straight back into being a father first and foremost, and then dealing with your deadlines on top of that. So I think it's made me more efficient. It certainly teaches you patience. It teaches you a lot about yourself, how you manage a high stress situation, how you teach somebody and communicate with. My son, he'll be 4 in December, so he's still quite young, and he'll make mistakes that they're not intentional mistakes, even if they have a bad repercussion involved with them for me. And that could be something as simple as like spilling juice on a couch, something that just he has no control over. I think that you just learn a higher level of patience, and you see so much of yourself in those little guys too. And be it a little boy, a little girl, like whatever your situation is, it's like you see yourself in there. And yeah, man, it's been the most magical thing. I could just gush about it. I'll kind of cut it off, spigot it off. Yeah. But it's been the greatest experience of my life.
Amazing.
And also I think there's been no greater growth in my life than since I became a father. That's for sure.
Beautiful. Yeah. I once again couldn't agree more. I've got 18 and turning 16 in a week, which is wild. Wow. And, I think a lot of parents sometimes miss the opportunity to like really see the world through their children's eyes instead of like vice versa. I see it sometimes, or especially like as your kids get older and they start having their own litany of problems and stuff. I see a lot of parents almost diminish them and be like, let me tell you about like real life problems, and you're like, or you take the opportunity to like remind yourself how a 16-year-old sees the world, because, right. if you dig in there, it's there, or how a 4-year-old sees the world, and which is sure to me, the most magical way to see the world. Especially when they're young like that, you get a very short window to have an opportunity to be reminded of what childlike wonderment is, and what we, especially as creatives, like that is what we should all be striving for. If we could see the world like a 4-year-old, art would be incredible, and I think the amazing artists, that's exactly how they do it. Like they were able to cling on better than others of that childlike wonderment.
It's the curiosity, right? Mm-hmm. That is, there's so much purity in curiosity when you're seeing something with either virgin eyes or just simply trying to understand it. And I guess it does translate into photography. It translates into the work we do, translates into making a film, whatever else. It's really getting as deep of an understanding as you can with what you're working with. That's one of the best parts about the work that we get to do. This is sort of deviating away from parenthood, mm-hmm. but is certainly in my career, I've been so lucky to meet so many different people from different walks of life. Like throughout the summer, I did a lot of work in the agriculture space where I was working with farmers in rural places. And this is stuff I've done like here and there over the course of my career, and I absolutely love it. But I get to go in and listen to somebody passionately tell me about soybeans, mm-hmm, right. But I can relate with this person because their passion is so sincere, and they're just taking me into the weeds on this thing that they like, or maybe it's a plant that processes these things or whatever it is. Or, I did a paleontology story last year, being around paleontologists and seeing how voraciously curious they are and knowledgeable around, isotope dating and knowing, like, just breaking down the anatomy of a new species. And they start comparing it to all these different animals. Like, well, you can tell it wasn't, an aquatic animal because in the crocodilian skeletons, you can see blah, blah, blah. And they're taking on these journeys. And as people like us, if you're making documentary or doing photos, journalism stories or whatever it is, even an advertising shoot, you get to be around the best of the best, and you get to go document them and sort of shadow them for a little bit of time, walk away a little bit smarter, and then go on to the next one. And that to me is one of the most refreshing and fun things about the job. It's the people that I've been able to meet over the years that can break down and what a 900 horsepower Jeep is and the mechanics behind it, all the way to an ornithologist that's telling me about, the follicles of feathers and the colors and why iridescence matters for ritualistic mating and all this other stuff. And it's like those divide lines there couldn't be any more 180 there. But to get a little bit of information from experts, God, it's so much fun.
Yeah, amazing. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people kind of going into that curiosity that I was talking about, I just see it a lot. Like there's a lot of people out there that miss an opportunity to be curious about people, even just everyday walk of life people. I think from doing this show for so long, it's kind of given me this practice of digging into people a little more. And I find myself not even purposely doing it, just trying to, instead of kind of ruling a conversation, which I have the ability to do sometimes, I really try to like open it up and find out about people. And sometimes, yeah, you're surprised. I'm like, wait, what? You're like, how did I not know this about you? That's fascinating. Let's talk about it. It doesn't always happen. I think to me, that is like your relationship with National Geographic. That is still the real magic that National Geographic offers, especially kind of going to what we were talking about, the diversity of your work. If you are one of those artists that they can rely on really kind of putting their own stamp on a diverse list of subjects, then they will present you the opportunity to talk to some of the most amazing scientists and researchers. And yeah, what an incredible opportunity.
They really are the hallmark of diversity and opportunity, and again, they do often hire certain people for very specific things. And that just makes a lot of sense. I've been pretty lucky. And then I've been allowed to sort of navigate around a fuller tapestry, I guess, so to speak, and experience different things, like be it cultural, climate-based, adventure-based, wildlife-based, whatever it is. I've been given a little bit of a longer leash, I think, in some regards to some of that, which I love because it really caters to my personality, I think, in terms of my curiosity levels. And also, a lot of it, though, when you're working for those magazines, it's not always just a forthcoming and given assignment. That's 50% of the time. The other 50% is hearing something and being like, that could be interesting for that institution. Right. The magazine might love this. The digital department might love this, whatever it is. TV might love this. And I think that's something when you're a freelance photographer, filmmaker, whatever it is, you always have to have ears to the ground. You meet someone at a coffee shop and they tell you something and you're like, that's pretty fascinating. And you start unpacking something and the next thing you know, you're like, there might be a story here from the barista. You know what I mean? And they take you down another field or you're on one job, but someone you had to interview has an entirely different, opportunity there that's just sitting on them. I can't tell you how often one assignment I've established a contact or two from that story that I've then gone on to do a completely different story with years later. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the job when you're a freelance photographer is depending on the type of work you're doing, right? It's so eclectic, but the type of work I do, finding new contacts, maintaining relationships, really curiously listening to what people have to say. And then also taking what you learned and attacking the research field so you can try to turn it into a story. It's a big part of the job. I
think that's important for people to hear, though, because a lot of people could look at your body of work and assume, I mean, he doesn't need to go out there and hustle stories. Like they're probably just presenting themselves to, like between editorial work, commercial work, you've got a huge list of clients. It could be easy to go, I mean, I'm probably good, like someone's going to call me or within the next couple of days and probably offer something. And so I'm just going to rest. And, to hear you say like, I'm always keeping my ear to the ground, looking for stories that I could then present to someone else. Like I said, it's important for people to hear because look, once again, I am guilty of doing that sometimes of, having amazing ideas maybe and going like, ooh, that's a really good story. And then doing nothing with it, like, and
right.
That the next step is the obvious, like, what are you going to do?
That's the grind.
Yeah.
It's the spade work, right? It's putting the shovel into the dirt and like figuring it out. Cause I can relate to both sides. It's like the ideas will show up and then maybe you try to execute them on them and they just don't work out, or you just simply forget and move on. But it takes a lot of energy, to go out and actually build an idea or a conversation you have with somebody into something bigger. And I am lucky that every contact I had just took painstaking effort over the years, to get into some of these institutions. It was not easy. And then once you get in there, you have to sort of prove yourself and become a contributor that these people want to use. But I think when you have an idea and you do build it into a pitch deck and you sell that pitch deck, and the next thing you know, you're out there actually responsible for the very idea you came up with and created and did all the research for, those are some of the most fulfilling moments in your career. And I think when you start getting a taste for that, you want to do it more and more and more. And you get confidence knowing that like, okay, this is something you can do. This is a way that works. And I would say for me, I can trace the way I work and pitch work today, aside from like, it's great when jobs just show up, when you can weigh them and figure out if it's the right one. That's the best. It's great to open up your inbox and be like, this is a really great opportunity. In spite of all of that, I'm always trying to work on the personal projects that I want to do because there's a different level of heart that's involved with them.
Right.
And coming in through action sports, most of it being rock climbing in the early days were places where they were all about your relationships, right? Would have relationships with athletes. They would have ideas of places they either wanted to go or a new hard route they wanted to do. And then with that information, I would rally together a publication to make them care about wanting to cover the story, or I would talk to commercial outlets around getting money so we could like go do these trips. And that hustle just came in really early in sort of the survival process of being a young professional photographer. I'm going back to like 2005.
Yeah.
And those rhythms, as you start to realize like, oh, if you have a good idea, you can sell it. You're going to hear no a lot, but it's once you get conditioned to the fact that that's just okay, that serves you well. And the more you do that and condition that muscle and condition that ability to know how to pitch, and that stuff will open up a broader variety of work. Because if you just rely on a certain set of clients to feed you work, it'll probably be the kind of work that is the same as the last time because you're reliable in that department, right? They're like, this person shoots great portraits of running shoes. We love the style. Just keep, that we're going to keep working with that person there. You're probably not going to end up on Mount Everest doing a big alpine trip. Right?
Totally.
You have to go get that and find
Yes.
that and establish the entirely new Rolodex relationships if that's the thing you want to do. It's funny, I still run into a lot of photographer buddies out in the field, or at a convention or whatever it is. And so often the question is like, how's the hustle? It's like still there for the people that are trying to push themselves.
Yeah.
And I love that. I think that that's a big part of, if you want to be a little bit more eclectic, be prepared to work and push and grind and figure it out and be good with your relationships. That's your highest currency.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear. It's something I think everyone struggles with, and as you get busier, if you're lucky enough to make a career out of this and things start happening, it becomes tricky to figure out, the balance of it all. Even look, man, like going through your feed again this morning, your Instagram feed alone, I'm like, man, what's his time management look like to like, I know he's busy. He's married. He's got a child. I'm sure you got plenty of bills and outflow and life. And on top of that, you're traveling, you're chasing a multitude of subjects. And like I said, just like how frequently you post and everything. I'm like, I don't know how he stays on top of all this, you know?
I appreciate that, man. I have a good archive too. I've definitely, and I've tried to capitalize anytime I do a shoot, I try to capitalize it on it to the most that I can. I mean, next week I have doing this little national park series through National Geographic, and I'm going to a couple parks. And while I'm there, I won't just be shooting the big scenics they need. There's always something else I'm curious to kind of go capture when I'm there. And a lot of that stuff just ends up in an archive, you know? But yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say I feel lucky and blessed to have seen so much of what I've seen and have done so much of what I've done. And, you know, your work begets work, right?
Yes.
Opportunities come when you do a great job on any given work. It's funny now being further along in my career and looking at some of the up and comers that you can just tell, you're like, that person's going to be fine. They're going to make it. Just watching the way they not just work, but find work. You're like, yeah, that they're playing the game. That's the way you do it, you know, and you see that. And then I think there's any number of ways you can do it nowadays. Social media wasn't even a thing when I started doing this full time. And I'm so grateful for it because it's become a huge part of my marketing strategy. And it's nice to have an audience that you can share things with, right? That it's fun. It's like your own little publishing platform. But yeah, I think if I'm given a wildlife job, I'm still going to try to get a little culture in there if I can. I'm still going to try to get a little something in there if I can. And I think that helps over time, keeps you creatively sharp, and it also gives you more work to put on Instagram.
Well, so like to on that note, then on the social media thing, let's just talk, even just Instagram. You got a big following there. Like, what does that look like for you when you say, you know, I've got a great archive? Are you planning ahead? Because once again, I think when I look at because I'm terrible.
The answer is no.
No. You're just looking you're like, I need to post
in the morning.
Yeah.
I have a ritual where I'm like, I have coffee. Sometimes, you know, it's been a little harder the last few weeks. It's just all schedule dependent. But generally speaking, I might look at what I've recently posted.
Right.
And I'm like, I've been doing a lot of birds lately. Like, let's throw a let's put a climbing photo in there. Like, let's put
a tornado in there.
And a lot of times it's funny because the photo I'm the most excited about, or the picture, you know, whatever it is, the video clip, whatever it is, oftentimes I'll know in advance, like, this is more for my friends that are going to appreciate than a general audience. You know, if I post certain work out there, it just doesn't, the audience that is my feed is attracted, they don't necessarily respond to maybe a portrait I shot of somebody a few years back, or even an action sports moment. They're just kind of like, where's the wildlife, and that's fine. Like, yeah. So you can see how things perform. And sometimes that influences what you put up, but I try to still put up what I like and care about and not be too concerned with who doesn't care. Well, and that whole world has changed immensely too. Yes. I can barely wrap my head around it anymore.
Well, that's what I was about to say. I think the difference with you, and I've got a lot of respect for it. I mean, if your end goal is to be a quote unquote creative influencer or something, you know, like, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a million opportunities, probably not a million, but there's opportunities out there that can be successful opportunities. It is something different that I've seen, especially in like the last 5 years or so, is a lot of people with the photographer, filmmaker title, but like their end goal really is to be a YouTuber. And once again, nothing wrong with that. I follow a lot of those accounts, and I'm entertained by a lot of those accounts. I think the difference with you and a lot of people like you is, yes, you came up early on and built a huge audience on Instagram, but your end goal is still a working photographer, director, filmmaker. You know, like, you're very busy shooting and getting paid to shoot and not relying on like, this is my career.
Right. And I think I am lucky in that I had the benefit of doing all of this before that became a really great way to build an audience and to make money. But from the people I've talked to that do that, and also just from sort of my own outside observations, it's it looks like a slippery slope. I mean, talk about a ton of work to go self-produce things
Right.
back to back to back to simply build an audience. And then once you have to keep feeding that thing. And so I'm fortunate in that I am doing work that isn't for Instagram. It just happens to end up on Instagram.
Yeah.
That there is and I don't think about that as much as I should. But you're right. If you were to be solely doing that, and who's to say if I was a teenager now and I was just cracking into this industry, how I created my work would probably be incredibly different. I would probably be looking at that,
Right.
like finding a brand, finding a shtick, finding whatever it is to effectively like build a channel. And I was just fortunate to come from a generation that didn't have to think that way first and foremost.
Yeah.
The rest was incidental. So
yeah, like I said, it's been a change, and I'm not saying it's negative or positive or anything, it just is what it is, but it's been a change. I see a lot of young people and their idea of what a successful photographer, filmmaker looks like is a successful YouTuber. And I think they are striving to also become that and not necessarily I shoot for National Geographic. There's plenty of young people that still definitely they want your life, but it just, it's been a change. I don't know. And like I said,
no, I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do. I see it. It'll be interesting to see what 10 years down the road looks like in terms of what people are contributing to institutions like National Geographic. Hopefully the magazine is still printing and it's not just an only digital thing. Who knows what 10 years is a lot of time in this world.
Yes.
Oddly. But you make a good point. I mean, most people are striving to, but I don't know. I think there's enough people it all depends on who you follow too. Yep. That's what your feed looks like and what the bigger picture looks like. I'm sure there'll be a whole new generation of people that are dedicated to journalism or natural history, wildlife, whatever it is. I'd like to think that would still iron out somehow. But I mean, the whole thing is if you have a publishing platform and you can monetize on it, people are going to find a way to make that work.
Yeah, why not?
But and it's fun too. I mean, I love just throwing a picture up on Instagram, and I mean, again, that's my sole platform. I didn't even really indulge the TikTok thing. I don't have the bandwidth. It was, and who knows what's going to happen with any of these platforms, which one's going to die and stay. And I try not to even think about that anymore. I try to look at those things as a place where you get to share your work. It's really fun, but they also do serve as a marketing platform, right? It's like, it's a portfolio, which is a great thing. But I don't know what the future of all that stuff looks like. I get asked that a lot too, because my feed has a good respectable following, I suppose. But
yeah, man.
I don't know much about I don't really know much more as like how you build something like that. I was lucky I got to contribute to the National Geographic feeds, and that attracts people to me. I'd be lying if I said that I built that audience off of, my own strategy. There was really no strategy ever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, man, the beautiful work is that should be strategy enough. I do want to talk a little bit about the storm chasing. You've been at it for several years now, like where'd that come about? And, let's dive into like what that work looks like for sure, because it's one of those things when I see you out there, I'm like, oh, good Lord, like it looks terrifying yet awe-inspiring at the same time.
I mean, I love it. I look forward to it every year. The origins of this, I can go way, way back. I'll keep this bridged. But basically, I grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which is right on the front range of Colorado, right where the plains turn into the mountains. And that is the last stop on Tornado Alley as far as going west is concerned, right? Once you hit those mountains, all those storms, they don't really operate. They break up and they become disorganized. And so I grew up seeing lightning storms and wild clouds. You'd be out skateboarding, and between May and July, you could reliably see thunderheads like almost every day between 3 and 5 p.m., right? There'd be a storm that blew through. And so when I got into photography, because I was so accustomed to seeing lightning, I have a ton of old film that's like lightning photos. I actually recently pulled it because I'm trying to put together a book on this whole thing. And so just being around dramatic weather was something I always liked, but I never pursued storm chasing per se, even knowing that I was like right there in Tornado Alley, so to speak. And it was in 2018 Crystal Wright, the photographer Crystal Wright. And I think maybe she's been on.
Yeah, twice.
Yeah, Crystal's great.
Mm-hmm.
So I met Crystal. She took a workshop this Rich Clarkson ones years back. I think it was 2010, maybe. Crystal flew out from Australia. Didn't need to take the workshop. She was looking to get connected with people. She's so talented, and we easily identified that at the workshop. We're like, she's good.
Right.
It's an incredible photographer. And so we established a rapport there. And then over the years, we just stayed in touch. And, I'd see her once or twice a year. The very few times I was in Australia, like we linked up there. If she's in the States, we would link up and kind of kept this friendship going. And in 2018, she had a storm chasing project that she had put together with a friend of hers who was kind of a mentor of hers in Australia. His name is Nick Moyer. And Nick basically, she wanted to do a short film on Nick. And she asked me if I wanted to come out and basically shoot all the time lapses for this project. So I joined her. This guy, Skip Armstrong, is an incredible director of photography. This guy, Toby Pike, who was directing it, Crystal and Nick. We jammed into a Suburban and we storm chased for like 2 weeks. And Nick was the guy that knew how to do it. He'd been doing this for some 20 plus years. And so under Nick's wing, we basically went and toured Tornado Alley. And after that, at the end of the trip, all of us were like, we have to do this every year. This was incredibly exciting. Talk about visual. It's so visual, but you need to go with someone who knows what they're doing, right? It's like heading into the mountains in the wintertime to be like, we're going to climb that mountain and knowing nothing about avalanche conditions, the appropriate equipment you should be bringing. It's like going in so green that it would be pretty foolish to do it. Like, yes, you can, but it's going to be a better experience if you do it with someone who knows what they're doing. So after 2018, I just started doing it annually. And the next year, Crystal and Nick flew back out, and then COVID hit, which kind of put a hiccup at things. And then I chased with Nick again in 2021, but I've kind of tried to keep that faction. But even when they can't make it out, I've met different people within that. It's like a subculture. It's like rock climbing or anything. There's a small group of people that do it really well, that are deeply passionate about it. And so once you find your little community, all of a sudden, you get to go more often. And for me, it's two things. I love the big weather events. They're beautiful and powerful. And, who doesn't want to shoot lightning bolts and look for tornadoes and crazy cloud formations? The other thing I love about it, I would say equally, is the sleepy towns you find yourself into. All the forgotten nooks of America. And a lot of them are like politically charged places where you can say you're in Trump country in a lot of ways. But I don't, none of that bothers me. I care less. It's like you go out, you meet great people. You just stay away from that level of conversation, and you're out there storm chasing. People have a story.
Yeah, I was going to say, people want to talk about storms. Yeah.
Totally. And even if it's, sometimes they maybe have a storm story, but other times it's even just being like, yeah, this is a fourth generation barbecue joint. Right. And you're just talking to somebody about that. Mm-hmm. And then you're shooting their portrait as you leave. And so it's like, you get this real vignette into Americana and experiencing places where you can tell they had an economy at one point and then it collapsed. It's everything. It's like this big wavelength of highs and lows out there. And I think it gives you a greater sense of empathy for what the country you live in is like. I don't even watch the news and do all that stuff anymore. It's so exhausting and poisonous. But this gives you an understanding and an insight into the people that that share the same country you do. That I've loved as much as the big explosive visuals.
I love that. Yeah, man, there's so much of that. Like, I find it so insulting when those are referred to as the flyover states, because like you said, it's a giant swath of this country.
And it's beautiful too.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I know there's no ocean or mountains in a lot of these places, but man, there's still a very special beauty. Mm-hmm. And it's fun to kind of be a tourist in that cultural sense and check out the local dives. And
that's what I was about to say. Like, find these pockets that haven't been ruined by modernity. Like, they still have these little mom and pop shops and restaurants, and there's not a Starbucks on every corner or whatever. Like, you can really.
You see tons of that.
Yeah.
Sleepy
love
towns
it.
Where Starbucks is like, well, we can't invest. There's no reason to invest there. It's just not it's not a good place for us to park this business yet. Yes. So you get to experience it without all of those places. And don't get me wrong, man, when you're traveling, finding a Starbucks
Oh,
is
dude.
critical.
Hey, listen, when I'm driving through those
I'm
areas
cool
we're
with that.
talking about, I'm looking for one usually. I'm like, come on,
Totally.
surely they've parked a Starbucks in here somewhere.
Oh, exactly. Let's talk about dive hotels
Yeah.
and scrapping together a meal here and there, and but really just witnessing what the landscape and the people that inhabit that landscape. That's special.
Yeah.
I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I had Nick on the show as well, and he's a real character. And
How did I miss that? Are you kidding? I got to go back and listen to that.
yeah, it was a while back. It was shortly after Crystal did the film, and so then I reached out to Nick, and yeah, it was great talking to him. And like you said, Yeti Presents just did a short piece on a storm chaser. You should definitely check out. And even there, it was like kind of this traveling circus of, like you had a real diverse group of characters that were all just out there, some very accomplished photographers mixed in with some people that probably shouldn't be out there, but it's like this love of like natural phenomena and being in the presence of, it's like big wave surfing and stuff. When you experience what nature can really throw at you, I don't know that you can ever experience anything bigger than that.
I mean, seeing nature in that powerful state is undeniably cool. But you have to, I think with storm chasing, you see a ragtag group of people out there. It's great. Mm-hmm. You'll see everything from someone who just is like, I just know how to use GoPros, and they've just put GoPros all over their car and they've welded it so it's hail proof and all this like just crazy stuff. To the people that are out there and they're serious photographers and that, they know how to do it and they're there for the visuals. There's some people who are just fanatical about lightning. They're like, if I see a tornado, cool, but lightning, like
yes.
They know what they like. It's like a safari out there. You get to see all these different events and things. And, but yeah, I think you have to definitely love weather and also be a little bit comfortable being uncomfortable. So
I'm sure. Yeah.
Knowing that you're going to be in the hit zone of certain things. I mean, this last year we had a good tornado year, but the people I went with Mike Ladzinski. I don't know if you've got Mike on the show yet, but he's a phenomenal photographer. I'll send you his details after the podcast. Mike is an incredible storm chaser and he's really safe. He's got kids, even though we were seeing tornadoes, he's not the guy that's like, okay, we're going to drive in and get a quarter mile from this thing. He was real calculated, which for me is really more what I am looking for when I go out and do that. I really appreciate the images people get that are crazy enough to get really close, but I'm happy doing it the other way. But you're still dodging light, man. The lightning we had last year was concerning. We had a few bolts that were very, very close. And you're out there with tripods. You get like 5 cameras set up. You're sitting there watching the weather, know. And then after a while, you realize like, okay, I got to sit in the car and just let the cameras do the work. I got to sit in where there's, the tires are grounded. And if we get struck, I'm not going to die.
Yeah.
Because this isn't worth like, I've got a son. And so the risk management in storm chasing, it's real. You have to, you could find yourself in a very hairy predicament if you make bad decisions or if you're with someone who's leading the procession that's making bad decisions. But I'll tell you, man, it's addicting. It's like anything else. It's anytime if you've ever photographed a big moment of anything, what that feeling is like.
Right.
And that's what you're hunting for that all day when you're storm chasing. And then when it happens, you're just full of creative adrenaline. You're watching your back, you're with people that you're experiencing it with. So it's a full value, really fun thing that I just hope to do every year that I can for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I love it. Once again, it's been one of the many facets of your work that I've really enjoyed, watching you and watching you evolve as you do it each year. Obviously you're getting better and you're figuring out probably what you like and what you don't and how to chase it better. So yeah, it's been really cool. Before I lose you,
Thanks,
I want to go through a couple of things. Cause when we did the show really early on, once again, I had just started it and, over the years especially lately, there's some questions I do like asking people and I'd love to hear some of your responses. But one, I think that's the reason I keep asking it lately is because I'm getting older. And at some point you just look back and you're like, wow, I've been doing this for 20 years. It's crazy. You know, like what happened? I don't like, and I guess this is what I do, you know, like it's too late for plan B or whatever. So I think this one, as I get older, interests me. But how do you think your definition of success has changed from the early days of skateboarding and rock climbing and, you know, your early introduction with National Geographic? I'm sure you had something that you were chasing that you've thought this means success. And has that changed at all as you've gotten older?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, the early years are scrappy. It's month to month. You're trying to figure out how you can actually turn this into a viable business. And I think that my North Star back then was more about places I hoped to work and contribute at. And I think that was the definition of success. You know, if I can do something for the New York Times, that will make me feel good. That will be a place where a lot of people this work can be shared. And I think I looked at who I could hopefully be working for as a benchmark of success. And I think that it is. I still think that it is. And especially when you're younger and trying to figure that out. But as I've gotten older, my definition for success now is being able to, kind of going back to a conversation we had earlier, creating an idea from the ground up and executing that idea. Mm-hmm. That to me is, you get to kind of go through a project that you can have all your fingerprints on it. That, in the business sense, in my photography creative pursuit sense, that is the definition of, to me, when I feel the most successful, when I've designed it and executed it, or I got brought in on it and I really got to contribute in a meaningful way. That's when I feel like I did my job to the best of my ability, and I feel the most fulfilled because I put so much into it. Obviously, family life aside, now being a good father, I know that's not what this question is about. But that to me is a thing in my life now that it also drives the decisions I make. Right. I've got multiple projects in play right now that I'm hoping I can get some firm concrete around, that if I can, they'll be some of the biggest, best work I hope to have ever done. And those are the things that always keep you hungry too, is, you know, like one of the projects I've currently have in pitch right now, I've been working on for like 5 years.
Wow.
Just on the ideation and the research, and I've done work around it in its periphery, so I have a good understanding of what the scope of the whole thing is. And if I can get that over the line, that will feel tremendous, you know. And I don't even care where it ends up. It's more about, like, if I can get someone to believe in the project, fund it, and do it, that will feel like I've accomplished something. And so, in short, it's the work that I create ground up that typically is the most rewarding these days.
Yeah.
And it's not to say commission work that shows up, I don't throw everything out. I do. I love that. And it's nice too, because you get to exfoliate most of the work, right? They're like, here's the objective. You're like, great. You know, I love that. But I equally like the other stuff where you got to go fight for it still. Like,
what's the balance, you know, I'm sure you'd be guessing percentage wise, but, you know, like commission versus things that you're pitching. And also you work in the motion space quite a bit. And so photography versus motion work.
Sure. I mean, I think with commission versus my own, for the first part of the question, it's 60, 40, 40, 60. That's just sort of always moving up and down on any given year.
Right.
Some years more work's being thrown and offered, and other years I'm building it myself. Oftentimes too, a lot of that too is you might be working with a company or an agency regularly for years and years, but the people you are working with end up leaving. Well, there's like a hard reset button there. Yeah. Usually the new people that come in have established relationships. So you have to go in and reestablish what you've already had. And oftentimes you lose a lot of momentum, which I also think is a good reason to not, if you're building your own work, I think it's a better place. It's riskier, but it's also less risky in the long term. You know, it's like if you have all your eggs in one basket in one place, and that person that you love working with, or that team you love working with, gets fired or moves on, like, oof, that's tough.
Yeah.
I've been there before too.
Of course.
So I think that balance, is necessary, but it's also fulfilling. But yeah, 60, 40, 40, 60, every year is different. But then photo and video work, I definitely direct a lot more than I do now in terms of actually filming. Mm-hmm. I'll film some, but generally speaking, if I'm working on a motion project, My role is more specifically in the direction of what the project's supposed to look like, from all the way from all the way through post-production.
Mm-hmm.
And so that space has changed for me. I think the older I've gotten as well, the bigger, heavier equipment, it's just, there's like an infinite amount of young people that are like dying to be the guy that's pulling focus and setting up the reds or whatever it is.
Right.
Because that's new to them. They're just so fired up on so nowadays, most of it is picture sensibility, like being like, let's frame it up like this. I want it to look like this, as opposed to doing it solely myself, and being more concerned with like what the arc of the project looks like. And so, I don't do as much sort of cinema work, so to speak, behind a camera as I used to. I do some, and I still do enjoy it, but I've kind of grown now to enjoy the process of overseeing the project. It's more fulfilling these days.
Yeah. You've been in it for a while. You've seen, from the earlier days of your career where editorial was still kind of king, and obviously you were chasing a lot of advertising work, to the early days of growing an Instagram audience and how that was able to influence clients and attract clients. You've seen a lot of changes in this industry just in your own career. Are there changes you see now that you're excited about? And then are there changes that make you nervous on like the future of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think the big one looming over most of us is what AI will and won't do. I don't really have the clearest understanding. At times I feel like I do, and other times I feel as if a lot of the work I'm doing will take a longer period of time before it truly becomes antiquated. I think when you're working on stories that revolve around documentary and journalism, that feels like the safest space for me, in my opinion, right now, as far as AI is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I think advertising is going to be more swallowed up in that space because you can do a lot with it. But that stuff concerns me, right? Because I don't have an understanding of what it will be. And when you've been doing something, you said it earlier, in 2025, it'll be my 20th anniversary of doing this full time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you're like, okay, well, what else do I do? If this were to go away, like, what do I do now? And so I guess what excites me about things right now is still trying to get some of these ideas that I feel like have taken my whole life to get to a point now where they're there for the taking, so to speak. That excites me. But as far as technological advancements are the things that concern me to some degree, and it would be more in the AI space. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah,
but
totally.
Those are the two things that have me excited and have me worried. And again, I've had such lengthy, I'm sure you have as well. I think I listened to, you had Tim Tatter on here.
Totally.
He broke it down better than anyone I've spoken to. And I love Tim and his work. That guy's an absolute legend, right? And he's so artistic. And I think his approach to all of this made so much sense when I listened to what he was saying. And I think he's smart in the sense that he's probably future-proofing his ability to continue to do what he's doing. Me, I'm kind of like sort of looking at it, but still trying to continue to do a lot of the work that I do because it's fulfilling and it's available and I like it. And I don't feel like all that work is done yet.
No, I agree. And I think, a lot of the space that you work in, I think continues, and maybe it'll change, I think continues to be a pretty reliably safe area that I just don't think it's going anywhere. I think when you're documenting something, people want to document that. They don't want some AI.
The human story.
Yes, it's a human story, and so, I think that'll always exist. And just like from doing this show, man, I've gone through a lot of these moments. I mean, Instagram, like there were a lot of people that were like, this spells the end of photography as we know it. They said the same thing then. I think AI is definitely a bigger force that it's hard to really wrap your head around what it means and what all it will be able to do in the next even year. It's moving so rapidly, but I just think even what I do, man, when I like for architects, I think, they spend, or an interior designer or whatever, a lot of these projects, they spend years on bringing to fruition. And so they want to document that, and they want to document it as it exists in real space. And so like, I'm basically doing documentary work most of the time, I'm documenting someone else's artwork. And so, I mean, I think you're right that people are just hungry for stories and for real stories. And I think even as you see people's continued delight in film photography and vinyl music, and like I think there'll always be a space, no matter how big AI gets, for people to be like, look, I want to know that there were real fingerprints on this.
Right. I think that one of the most frustrating things with the whole AI conversation is, as we get further and further into this, having to justify that was real and it wasn't AI. Like, that's a new conversation.
That's true. Yeah. Right.
It's no different. I mean, it's way bigger than back when it was like when Photoshop was becoming slick enough where people could go in and manipulate it. And there was like little murmurs of like, was that altered? Was that blah, blah, blah. But that was such a smaller conversation compared to.
Yeah. Does this even exist?
Right. Totally. And so to me, that's one of the more frustrating things, to be like, no, man, it's real. Like, I shot that.
Yeah. Do you ever have moments of, you shoot so much, and, and we talked early on about how you're just still so passionate about it. Does that passion ever, do you get burned out ever? Do you ever have moments where you're like, I just don't want to do this right now?
The thing that burns me out, shooting now, when I'm behind my camera, that love is, if anything, only gotten stronger and bigger. I love that. It's a quiet space. It's everything about it. I love. It's some of the business stuff.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that just grades on you after a while, depending on the project or whatever. It could be someone you're working with. It could be someone you're working for, like whatever it is. That's the stuff that bogs me down the most. And it's the most critical part of continuing to do this work, is you have to run a business, right? And so that's the stuff that fatigues me more than anything. The process of working with cameras and everything else has never, I still feel as excited, if not more. And I say that honestly too. And I'm actually surprised to say that.
Yeah.
Because, and it doesn't even matter. Sometimes I'm doing a job where it's not necessarily something I would have tried to do. It's just it's a job that you get hired to go do. And I can still go out and find fun in whatever that job is, because once the lights come out, once the, action cues come out, once whatever it is comes out, it becomes fun immediately. Doesn't matter if you're shooting a toilet paper ad. You're like, we can have fun with this. Let's light it nice.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. I mean, I think that's why you make such a good ambassador, and, to have, for Canon to have someone like you is important, because I think it comes through, man. Like, I know you just said, like, I'm not just saying that. I think it comes across in your work. And then once again, when I see little snippets of you, of kind of behind the scenes moments, I can feel that, like, man, he's still really excited about this. And I don't know that it's true with everyone, like, I've had my moments, for sure, where I'm like, what is this still what I want to do? And I think, like you said, when I'm honest about the parts that I'm probably talking about when I say that, it is just the never ending feast or famine chase of money, and that's the reality of it. Like right. Like, that's not going anywhere. Money's important. It can't buy you happiness. Dude,
you got a family.
Yes,
we all have responsibility.
Right.
We all have to have an economy that makes sense. And not to mention, to be a photographer or be a filmmaker or whatever it is, it's expensive.
Yeah.
Your computer needs upgraded all the time. The gear, there's always some new great piece of gear that will really help you out and change, or the standard is there and you have no choice. So yeah, it's expensive, man. Mortgages are expensive. All of it. So I get it. I think it's the most fatiguing part, I think for most people I talk to.
What I was going to say is, I think when we were talking about just trying to remind yourself to, when you said that kind of point and shoot mentality, sometimes that is where I'm like, oh yeah, I still love this. 100%. I still love it. I don't need an audience for this that I'm doing. There's something about it that still very passionate about. And you said it well, as far as like, yes, sometimes I'm burned out by the business. I'm very fortunate and grateful. I have tons of gratitude that people choose me instead of someone else, like that's what an amazing thing to happen. But it can be exhausting sometimes for sure.
Yeah, no, I understand. And sometimes it's the client too, you know, I mean, you work in a pretty finicky space. I'm sure you get paired up every now and then with an architect where you're like, wow.
Yeah, maybe.
I would assume, I have no idea, but I would just assume, you know.
You would assume correctly, for sure. Well, look,
and that's what makes the job tough. It becomes work as opposed to photography.
Yeah. Well, I want to get you out of here. I know, you know, we've gone for a while, but I can't remember if I asked you this the first time we talked, but even if I did, you know, I'm sure the answers change, but, you know, just kind of closing words of advice or, you know, words of wisdom you give to others seeking their own creative path out there.
Sure. I mean, I think anyone that's up and coming, finding your voice, I think is incredibly important. Not getting overly influenced by someone else's work, you know, don't get infected by it. Be more, just keep pursuing yourself, manage your relationships well. If you have a goal, break that goal down. If your goal is to be the next big mountain bike photographer, I'll just do something, you know, like that. It's first find some people that are really good on their mountain bike and build relationships there, and then work on the client stuff. Once you know that you're in a place that, you know, you can, that you can deliver. But I think shooting the thing you love the most is where you're going to have the greatest longevity. So if you find something you love, you got to just throw everything you have at it. You know, I think I meet a lot of people that this is the life and the path that they want to take. I think the one thing to know is that it will be hard. It will be full of it will be full of incredible moments, but it'll also be incredible lows. And so you just have to take them in stride and know that is just simply the way it is. It's a competitive industry. So if this is something you want to do, obviously get good at what you want to shoot, but then know that just because people aren't pounding down your door to hire you or the ideas you're presenting aren't necessarily ideas they need at that time. Because a lot of it's timing too. You might have the best idea in the world, but someone's publishing calendar is like, no, we're actually focusing on XYZ next year. Right. We love the idea. It just doesn't work. And know that that's just part of the process. You know, it's not personal. And once you can get past that, you'll be in a better position, but it takes a lot of thick skin early on. You know, I'm so glad I grew up as a skateboarder because you fall all the time. Yeah. You do not land the trick most of the time when you're sort of pushing yourself to try to get a little bit better or learn something new. And so failure just becomes a normal process where you're like, yeah. So when you take that into the business world, don't just expect to come out swinging and be Dan Winters. Doesn't matter if your work is as good as Dan Winters. You still need to go find people that also believe that. And that's hard. But if you're persistent and you're charismatic and you can't be an asshole either, man, that buzz goes around real quick. And so be a good person, be hardworking, and be willing to hear the word no and stay positive and keep pushing. That's how you make it.
Love it. There you go. That's how we'll end it. Keith, man, thank you so much for taking time out, coming back on the show. Thank you for continuing to listen. That really made my day when you said I listen to the show.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I'm gonna go listen to that Nick one right after this. I got I'm editing, photo editing right now, so that's my audio book and podcast time.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll try to find what episode it is for you. But thanks again, man. Such a fan, and it's been great catching up. And good luck with everything you got going on. Can't wait to see what's next.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure. Let's do it again.
All right.
Revolution.
And that's it. What do you think? Hopefully you enjoyed it too. That's where I'm going to leave it. That is it for another episode of Visual Revolutionary. Once again, at Visual Revolutionary on Instagram, at Visual Revolutionary on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And that is it. I'll be back soon for another episode. Until then, I'm out. Peace.
Revolution.